Alrighty. I think I will place that link to those materials just one more time in the chat because I know folks joining late may not see that, and I'll just share that again. All materials for today's meeting can be found at that link, and rename yourself in Zoom with your name and your pronouns and your organization. That would be very helpful. And Steve, I'll let you kick it off.
Sounds good. Thank you, Talia. Welcome, everyone. Very excited to have all of you, all the representatives together here tonight to continue our discussion. And I just wanted to say a few things to kind of set the stage. I think as Kim just mentioned, with smoke coming from the west, we're reminded on a daily basis that that's just one reminder. That the world, the planet, our home is, in a lot of senses under siege. We're living in a time of pretty dramatic change. And that's something that's, not insignificant, something that we need to be very diligent about working on and trying to address. Tonight, we're going to discuss some of the, things that we can do, to help that situation. But I do want to make sure that we all understand that we, Watertown as a community, isn't going to solve the world's problems. We're not going to solve the nation's problems. We're not even going to solve the region's problems. But what we want to do is focus on the things that we can do as a community to help contribute in a positive way to making changes and move us in the right direction. We as a community can certainly be very thoughtful and purposeful in how we address what we can do moving forward, set an example for others, and certainly do as much as we can to make the world a better place going forward. I think along with that, the other thing that we want to try to do is to really focus on some short-term actions, things that we can put in place, things that we can do now that will start to move us in the right direction and to help get us moving in the direction towards our long-term goals. And again, be a positive contribution and an example for others in terms of ways we can help, navigate our way into the future. So with that, I will turn it over to Kim and our consultant team at KLA to lead us through tonight's discussion.
Great, thanks.
Or Talia.
Either one. Kim, did you want to say something real quick?
No, not at all. I think Steve did a great intro, and you will all hear plenty from me shortly. So I'll let Talia take it.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen here. Are folks seeing the PowerPoint presentation? I get some thumbs up, nods. Excellent. Okay. Well, welcome everyone to the second meeting of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. We're really excited, or Stakeholder Advisory Group. We're really excited that you're all here today. Just some Zoom reminders. If you haven't renamed yourself already, please do so. Add your organization and your pronouns if you'd like. That'll help us sort you into breakout groups. And some Zoom reminders also to stay muted if you're not talking. And it's okay if you need to step away for a second, just make sure to distinguish between on time and off time by turning on and off your video. All right, let's get started. So today's agenda, in brief, we're going to be reviewing the plan process and some of the progress that our working groups have been making over the past several weeks. We'll be giving an overview of our timeline as well. Then we'll briefly share some community engagement updates. And then Mike will be diving into some of the results of our greenhouse gas assessment, as well as the priority strategies that have emerged from our greenhouse gas forecasting effort. Then we'll be spending the bulk of our time breaking out into our working groups to really dig into action refinement and identifying barriers and opportunities to implementing those actions. And then we'll come back together for some closing words. And this meeting is being streamed for the public. So folks who are not in this physical Zoom room, just a reminder that you can send any comments to this email that's on the screen. That's resilient@watertown-ma.gov. And we will do our best to respond to those comments and incorporate them into the planning process. Okay, so just briefly the objectives for today's meeting. We're gonna, again, recap what's been going on so far, and then we're gonna really get into our action refinement and identifying barriers and opportunities. That's gonna be what we're focusing on today. It's gonna be some rich discussion later. An overview, again, of the stakeholders that have been involved in this process, the different layers. So the town is facilitating this effort, and then we have a core team that's consisting of some key town staff and the working group leads, so the folks who've been kind of facilitating your working groups, as well as the consultant team here. And then this stakeholder advisory group, which is the larger group of folks like you in the working groups who are going to be providing input into our actions and strategies. And then the larger public who we've been engaging in various ways already through surveys. And we're also going to do some focus groups with renters and other members of the community a little later into the fall. And the working groups, as a reminder, you probably know which one you're in, but a quick overview: that's natural resources, transportation and mobility, buildings and energy, infrastructure and waste management, public health and community preparedness, and community engagement, which is a group that some folks are in addition to their main working group. And we won't be doing a breakout group today for community engagement, but I know Laurel's been in touch with you all already. Okay, this slide is an overview of where we've been over the past couple of months and where we're heading in the next couple of months. So in May, in our first stakeholder advisory group meeting, we really honed in on the vision and goals for this process. So we presented some of the initial baseline assessment information, and we brainstormed goals. And then our team, the core team, took that and the feedback through the June working group meetings to really finalize those goals, which you'll be seeing tonight. Now we're really getting into action refinement and prioritization. The working groups identified a bunch of actions over the past couple of months, and we'll be breaking out again to discuss those and refine those today and discuss barriers and opportunities. And then in the coming months, in August and September, we're going to be taking some of the questions that we've generated today as part of our discussions and helping to answer those and do any additional research that we need to really make sure that the strategies and actions we're putting into the plan, we can figure out a way to implement, and we'll need your help in making that happen. And then in October, we'll hold our third stakeholder advisory group meeting. That's been pushed back a month into October to give the working groups a little bit more time in August and September to do that research. And we'll be developing implementation blueprints for some priority actions. So really mapping out who are the champions of these actions, what are the steps that we need to take to achieve our goals, and details related to equity considerations and funding opportunities. So we'll start to build those out. Okay, that's the timeline through October. And then after that, our team will be taking all of this feedback as well as the additional feedback from the public engagement and compiling it into a final plan, which we will then share with you all for your feedback later in the fall and then into early winter. And throughout the process, community engagement is a huge part of this. So like I said, there'll be surveys and there have been events and focus groups as well. All right, I'm going to hand it over to, I think, Therese to give a brief update on how our engagement's been going.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. I've been working with Laurel and Laurel's fabulous intern, Eva, on engagement activities throughout the past several months. If you go to the next slide, please. So just an update on our first survey, our priorities survey. We had 325 participants. It just closed last Friday. The renter survey is a separate survey and it has had 135 participants so far. So those two surveys combined exceeds the number of survey respondents that we got during the MVP process last year. I do want to note that survey 1 did attract a lot of higher income families, and the renter survey did tend to skew younger than the general survey. We did not have any takers yet on our Spanish language surveys, so we paid for translation and we did some extra outreach, but we didn't get any Spanish survey takers. And then, as I mentioned, having the lower income residents may not be seeing our survey either. So we'll be looking at that as we look to our next round of outreach and our second survey. Next slide, please. Laurel, do you want to say anything quickly about your in-person outreach?
Not really, but it's been fun. As you can see, Eva and myself tabled at the Watertown Farmers Market recently. We have lots of other in-person, COVID willing, safe opportunities coming up soon as well. I will definitely be calling on all of you to potentially help out with some of that, because it's more fun when we get to do these things together. So I'll hand it back to you, Therese.
Yeah, absolutely. Volunteering and help with outreach is going to be really important. Nagging all of your friends and family members, colleagues, to take the surveys and participate. We do have a resilient housing focus for this plan. So we've got the renter survey will stay open until the focus group, and then a survey for landlords also just opened. If any of you are property owners or renters, you might be interested in taking those surveys. And then we'll do focus groups to have a little more in-depth conversation with renters and landlords, really targeting that sector for energy efficiency and resilience. And Laurel is working on putting together an engagement activity with the Watertown Housing Authority. They were really interested in partnering with us. So stay tuned for more information there. Survey 2 will be focused on really pretty similar to the work that we're going to do today as a group. How are we going to implement some of these high impact actions that we know we need to do? So what are some of the barriers that community members face in adopting an electric vehicle or paying for retrofits in their homes? So it's really important to see that from the community perspective, and that's what we'll try to capture with our second survey. And that's it from the engagement side.
Thanks, Therese. That's over to me to talk about the THG assessment. So yeah, let's dive into it. So just a quick word on sort of what the activities have been here since we completed the greenhouse gas inventory. And it really is sort of a sketch planning, and just to bring folks into sort of what that typically entails. We're really looking at the what kinds of outcomes are ultimately going to be, the sort of configurations of performance, both with things happening in Watertown and other things happening like the carbon intensity of the grid that are going to come together and help meet the ambitious climate reduction targets that we're aiming for here. It's sort of a high level approach. Cities are complicated. There's lots of things going on. There's only so much we can really get into the weeds on. And these are also just informed by the best available data. The future is very much uncertain. We don't know how, is 20 years out, are they going to just stop selling fossil fueled cars altogether? Maybe, but it's hard to make that assumption. So we work with the best available data to do this, but then it's going to be back over to the working groups in the process forward to figure out sort of how we get to those outcomes. Next slide. So just a quick recap on the inventory. This is super short, but just to sort of remind folks of where we started with the baseline of 2019. So we didn't pick 2020 for obvious reasons. Things like the carbon intensity of the grid. We're using regional emissions factors there to make sure that we're really thinking about the actual impact of our actions when we reduce electricity use and what's going to happen to the physical grid. Noting that the transport sector does include both the transportation activity of residents and inbound commuters. So trying to get, whether you're working or living in Watertown, we've got an opportunity to take action against those things. But you can see the results there just in terms of the rough breakout in terms of which is the highest. Obviously, buildings and transport really dominate, which is not to say that the waste is not important. All of these things are going to be key for us to hit the targets. Next slide. A lot of this work is built on the state decarbonization roadmap. So that informed a lot of what we put into this, but they did, there are some nice things about the way that they present this information, especially noting with the increased uncertainty over time. The future is uncertain. It's hard to do these projections out very far. This does rely, or the state does rely on sort of rural land to balance what's going to be the urban sort of residual GHGs that are hard to reduce, that little 15% that's below. The state has the ability to rely on those things. It means we're going to have to work harder within the city if we're going to get to zero. And also the state can rely on things like credits for transportation. Okay, next slide. Business as usual. So we start off with thinking like, well, what happens if Watertown does nothing? And this basically incorporates the state mandates to ultimately get the grid to 100% clean electricity by 2050. So that's the only major change here, although there are some other things that we baked into it. So moderate increases in population. And we did try to think about, well, at least some things that we can project for increases in building space. So some of the near-term lab projects that we could see, okay, there's 200,000 building square feet of lab space going in. Those are visible there in that little bump that we see in the immediate couple of years. But generally, you'll see at the bottom there, the electricity wedges peter out as the grid gets cleaner, and the big chunks moving top to, or bottom to top, the yellow and dark green for natural gas, dark blue, fuel oil, then the next big green stripe and the lighter green stripe, on-road transportation, and the very top stripe is waste. So you get a sense of where those things are going. Next slide.
Mike, there is a question in the chat that might be, it's just asking about, Vincent is asking if waste includes the improper disposal of refrigerants.
It does not, no. That data is, well, it's not recorded anywhere. That certainly happens. And there's, I think, opportunity for ensuring what materials or equipment that the town is able to collect can reduce those things. But yeah, they're more difficult to inventory.
And then Janet has a question about just how we were defining the near-term projects, because it sounds like there's a lot more lab projects on the boards, is what Janet's noting.
Those were the ones that I was able to find information on. So yes, there probably are more, but those were at least the ones where I had a clear view of square footage.
But there's another question here asking, are you saying that the GHG assessment is not specific to Watertown? It is specific to Watertown, but Mike, do you want to?
I'm not sure in what way it would not be, but it is, these are, and that's largely the point of the inventory of getting those things that we can find good data on that are actually directly tied to activities and the built environment of Watertown. I don't know if there's something more specific that we're trying to get at there.
And a clarification on EV on-road. What is that if not electric vehicle?
That is electric vehicle, yes, EV on-road. It is imperceptible on this chart, but it is there. There's a tiny little piece of yellow that shows up there, but it'll show up a little bit better on the next slide, but it is incorporated in this. Sorry, there's a lot going on that is very hard to get into for interest of time.
And I think the question is more on just the on-road. So we do differentiate between on-road and off-road emissions. That's why the on-road is just being very specific that this is for on-road vehicles.
Yes. Keeping it on that point, so you can see in the very middle of this slide, there's a a sliver of yellow that appears and then disappears. So that's EVs taking over on-road vehicles, but as the grid gets cleaner, those GHGs go away, even though they're taking up basically all of the vehicle miles traveled. So what we did then for setting up the analysis and giving the sort of indicators that we need to be hitting, that we're going to talk more about in the breakout groups here, was really sort of applying the pace of actions and really kind of the key levers that are in the decarbonization roadmap. So electrifying buildings, switching over to EVs, and eliminating waste are the big ones. So that's applying those assumptions to the Watertown baseline data. We end up with a 90% reduction by 2050. So it's pretty good, but otherwise conservative assumptions. We're not, like I said before, we're not assuming that fossil vehicles are just going to go away. They might, and this could get rosier, but this is sort of the projections as we can do it now without making too many assumptions. But again, I think the point is long term, we'll probably be able to do better in many cases. We can't project that far out, which is another reason why we want to try to stay focused on the near-term actions. So what are those actions? Again, in buildings and energy, eliminate fossil fuels as an allowed energy source for any new construction and major renovations, electrify existing buildings running on fossil fuels, enhance and actively promote deep energy retrofits and aggressive energy conservation programs, accelerate the installation of rooftop solar throughout town, and leverage Watertown's electricity choice program to achieve 100% renewable energy townwide. So we'll be talking about those in that group. Other ones, transportation, accelerate the shift to electric vehicles, but also enhance and actively promote zero carbon mobility options for commuting. So it's not just going to be EVs. Under infrastructure and waste, reduce consumption and disposal of plastic as the main culprit in the waste that goes to the incinerator. The main source of GHGs there will be the primary action there. And under natural resources, enhance forest and open space parcels, protect and enhance and diversify the tree canopy to give us more carbon sequestration benefits and lots of other resilience benefits. But it's not just about mitigation. We've got adaptation, high impact strategies as well. So under infrastructure and waste, systematically integrating climate change projections into design of all new and upgraded infrastructure projects, incorporating water and wastewater efficiency into new construction or renovation. Under natural resources, to promote regenerative landscaping practices and minimize stormwater runoff. Public health and community preparedness, enhancing accessibility of existing emergency preparedness resources, and improve heat resilience tools and resources. And lastly, build resilience against climate effects broadly. So those are the things that we're aiming to do. And I believe it is now over to talking about how we're going to go through the exercises.
So actually, Talia, I'm going to go back to the last two slides just for a second, because I really want to explain a little bit more to the group. You saw Mike's great analysis, and on the mitigation side, it's pretty standard at this point what every community needs to do to reduce emissions. That's kind of just across the board. So there's not really a lot of options where we're at. 20 years ago was a little bit of a different story, but we've got 9 years to really take the aggressive action that's needed to avoid catastrophic climate change. And so really at the point where these are the actions that we know work, we know we have the solutions for them now. We're very fortunate to be in Massachusetts, where there's a lot of support from the state to take this work on. There's a lot of rebates and incentive programs. And as Mike indicated, the decarbonization roadmap has really been a game changer for this work, because it allows us to make some connections to really detailed specific targets that would have been really nearly impossible to do otherwise on a municipality basis. On the flip side, the adaptation kind of metrics and high impact strategies are not so like open closed book, like absolutes. There's a lot of flexibility there, and there's still not a lot of agreement in this space on every single thing that has to be done. in particular around looking at the different metrics of resilience. Each region is going to be different, communities are going to have different metrics, and so it's still very much an evolving field on the adaptation side. And so what we're trying to do here as much as possible is to keep the mitigation and adaptation aligned and be as driven by the data that we have as possible. And so obviously looking at greenhouse gas emission sources on the mitigation side, and then looking at what are the climate impacts that are going to be most significant for Watertown, and how can we identify strategies, high impact strategies, to really move things forward. So that's kind of where these came from. You will see, and we'll have the discussions in the breakout groups about those of you that have already met and have talked about some of the goals that we, the draft goals and draft actions. We're now adding in this layer of high impact strategies. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about to you all now, because this is going to be the big exercise that we're doing. As Steve noted at the beginning of the session, we really need to focus in on these short-term opportunities that's going to get us onto this pathway that Mike showed us to get to at least getting us to 90% by 2050. There could be things that come up in the next 10, 20 years that help us get that last 100, last 10% to get to the full 100. We can't anticipate all of that now. And so it's really important that we are thinking about what can we do here and now, and how fast can we get it done? Because pretty much, particularly the United States, but certainly the most of the world, we needed to have been doing this for the last 5 or 10 years. So we are already behind on where we need to be. So there's certainly that sense of urgency, but also, again, the comfort in knowing that we have the resources and solutions that we need. It doesn't mean we have them all, but we at least have enough to start tackling those big emissions areas and addressing some of your big impact challenges. So what we're hoping to do, you can go to the next slide. First, I want to kind of break down just some adjustments and some of the key terms of how we're looking at the overall plan structure. I think, most of these are still the same, but there's a few just slight shifts. We are making a bit of a shift because of the decarbonization roadmap and the opportunity that it presents for you all to have the most actionable plan possible. And so we're going to be spending these our breakout groups kind of diving into these a little bit more, but ultimately the plan elements are still the same. So, that's those core topics that are included as part of this plan. One example here is building and energy. Your guiding principles are still the same. Those are your core values. We want to make sure that anything we identify, even if it's like the absolute best mitigation action or resilience action, that we're still paying attention to our guiding principles and not, say, exacerbating existing inequities. And so equity and justice is one of your guiding principles. A goal is very specifically, and this is where we have made an adjustment, because some of the sample goals we sent you didn't quite align with this, and that this is an adjustment we are making to help things be more clear. But really focusing in on what you want to accomplish, but presenting it as a broad statement. Think about this as an outcome statement. So an example would be, by 2050, 100% of existing homes and commercial buildings will be fossil fuel free. What we've been able to do with, now that we have this analysis completed, we are able to very specifically tie these goals to the pathways to get you to achieve your carbon reduction and your resilience goals for your community. And that's really, I think, going to help us have the most effective plan possible. When we're talking at that high level, like, okay, 2050, we have to have every building fossil fuel free. Well, then what does that look like? And we add in this kind of strategy level, because this is kind of thinks about the general approach that we're going to use to accomplish it. So it's, how are we going to accomplish this goal? In the past, I mean, I've been doing these plans for 20 years. So in the past, like, this may be where we stopped. The action was electrify existing buildings running on fossil fuels. Well, then that meant to implement your plan, you then had to go through a process of figuring out, okay, what are the different mechanisms? How are we going to do that? What's that process going to look like? What are the barriers? We don't want to do that anymore. We don't have time for that anymore. Now we have the data that tells us exactly where we need to get to. Like, even very specifically, if it's 100% by 2050, Mike now has targets for us, which I'll show in a minute, for each, set of years. 2025 by this many, we need this many by 2030, 2040, so you can really target out things very specifically. So electrify existing buildings running on fossil fuels becomes a strategy. Then what we're going to do is utilize mechanisms. So as a local government, Watertown has at its disposal various tools that will help you develop actions and address this strategy. Different ways you can look at it. You can look at electrifying buildings through regulation. You can look at it through incentives, voluntary programs, education. Those are the primary mechanisms we'll look at. If others have strong thoughts on that, you can bring it up in your breakout group of other mechanisms we can look at. But as a local government, there's kind of a standard set of tools. In this case, we have an example of education. As we're going through and understand, like, all right, so if we were looking under education, what could we do to electrify existing buildings? Well, that specific activity is going to be, in this case, as the example, develop a targeted campaign to encourage installation of heat pumps. That is one opportunity. There are existing heat pump rebate programs in the Commonwealth. Maybe we want to focus in on our oldest buildings. Maybe we want to look at, start with the ones that are on oil heat. There's a lot of different ways you might want to look at a campaign like that. But that would be an action, that would be an education type action. And then we're looking at our indicators. Of course, we need to be able to track the progress. The town has their dashboard. We can easily be tracking what we're doing. And so looking at, in this case, number of residential buildings electrified each year, that is your metric or your indicator. And then in targeted, and this is the correct number, right? For Mike's numbers, I think this is correct number. So 3,830 residential units will be electrified by 2030. So not an insignificant amount. So this is the example, this is kind of the key terms example in your working groups, your breakout groups, sorry, today will have this at your disposal so folks can look through this. But the idea is we're kind of adding in this piece and we're going to use these mechanisms. If you're in a working group that already identified a number of actions, awesome, that's no problem. We're just going to put it right into the worksheets that we're working on, and I'll show you those next. So this is what the worksheets look like. Here's an example of looking at new construction. So the first strategy that Mike noted, eliminate fossil fuels as an allowed energy source for any new construction and major renovations. We have regulatory requirement opportunities. We have voluntary ones, we have incentives, we have education, as I've already noted. We also might want to look, we might address our municipal buildings maybe differently than we would address residential or commercial. And so we're breaking it up by the sectors as well. And so the idea, and actually we're going to go through this exercise together in a second, is that we'll go through this and start thinking about everything that's in one of those boxes, create a green net zero building zoning requirement. That's something that City of Cambridge has done. It is possible to be done. And I think we have to think about if the updates to the state energy code are actually going to move fast enough for our targets. And we do not think they are. So it's something to think about. So then once we identify the actions here in this box, then we're going to say, okay, now how do we get these done? This is the piece, right? This is where it really matters. What are the barriers? If we wanted to create a green net zero building zoning requirement, what would that look like? Well, Steve is an expert planner and knows all about zoning, and so can give us guidance on that, right? What might be some of those other barriers? What are the opportunities to overcome those barriers? Do we want to make sure that we're working very closely with our developers? We don't want to just come in with that regulation stick, but when we know that we have a shared goal of maintaining Watertown as a thriving community despite the impacts of climate change, well, there's certain actions that we need to take. And if that's the path that we have to go on, which the data is showing us, let's make sure we're doing it in a way that we're bringing everybody along for the ride and having discussions. There are plenty of developers in Massachusetts, actually hundreds of them, that build to net zero on a regular basis and are finding that it's less than 1% of the increase in the initial costs. So, and then there's all the benefits on the flip side of that. So there's opportunities, but I think it's important, like so listed here is an opportunity, like maybe we start working with folks, maybe it's a focus group, we start figuring out what does this look like? How do we transition in a way that works for everybody? Maybe the town supports some training or education. And then we may have questions as we're going through these. We all on this Zoom may not have all the answers. We're going to hope to get as much as we can from this group, from the town staff, from our public engagement process, but there may be some lingering questions or data needs that we have to move forward with, or in order to really identify and understand what these barriers look like and if they are, able to be overcome. That's what we're going to be focusing on. We're going to document all of those here, and then we're going to have you all helping us get that information so that we can really get to that final list of actions for your plan that we will develop implementation blueprints for in October, which will then be breaking out into very specific steps. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we're thinking about equity here. If we are to create a net zero building zoning requirement and it becomes a little bit more, just slightly more expensive to build, then our rent's going to go up, or will mortgages go up? How does that impact our community members? We want to make sure that we are not setting a situation up where, as I was noting with that guiding principle, that we're exacerbating existing inequities. So we want to have those conversations as well. And so what you're going to be doing in your groups, and again, we're going to walk through an exercise together as a full group, is really diving into all of these pieces, because this is what's going to help you get the most actionable plan possible so that you really can move forward on those short-term opportunities. And when I say short-term, this is like today, over the next 5 years, these are opportunities to start moving forward, implementing this work so that you can get on that path to 2050. If we wait another 5 years or 10 years to get started, there's no way you're going to be able to get to that 90% reduction based on what we currently know and have for tools and technology and solutions. Okay. Nope, I think that was it. So, Talia, do you mind going to a buildings and energy worksheet?
Yep, just give me a second.
Yeah, no problem. So for those on the Zoom, I know we just gave a lot of information. I can actually take this. I'm going to start sharing some of the baseline information. We're going to do one of the buildings and energy strategies because there's a lot in there for obvious reasons. As you're working on that, Talia, I will pull this up. We have some data here that will be useful. All right.
And we're seeing the notes.
Yeah, that's what I
display.
figured would happen.
Yeah.
Let me just switch to the other screen. All right, how's that?
Good.
All right, so as Mike and his team have been going through the various data sets that we have, some of the things that we understand, obviously we've already talked about decarbonizing buildings, but things that you might want to understand and look at here on the residential side, you can see that natural gas is actually one of our big, is one of the big uses per square footage. And there's a lot of oil still in residential, which is typical for us here in Massachusetts. You can also see where the emissions are coming from. So you're getting a lot more emissions on the commercial side from electricity than you are on the residential side, and then slightly more natural gas, and then a lot more oil again. And so thinking about knowing that, this helps us understand like what are opportunities to target certain areas. And then this is really the table that helps us move it all. If we know that electrification is key, and the reality is the reason we have to electrify, we tried to do this, interim natural gas thing. And that we worked for a while, but now we're beyond that because natural gas still is a fossil fuel. And so we know that it's just going to be a lot more possible and feasible to electrify the electricity grid, to add renewables to the electricity grid. And if we can do that fast and we can do it at scale, then when we electrify all the buildings, we electrify our vehicles, we're able to have it generated as much as possible and 100% by 2050 from renewable energy sources. And that's how we can achieve our goals. And frankly, the region achieves them together. But when we look at the different buildings and how we have to do it, 2025, which is like so scary because that feels like it's a blink of an eye away. But utilizing the state decarbonization roadmap as our guidance, essentially we need to get to about 962 of your buildings retrofit by 2025. That's about 10%. And then as you see, that 3850 is a huge number by 2030. and then even almost double that by 2040. So the numbers keep going up and they get a bit scary, which is why we need to start tackling this now, because otherwise your 2030 number is going to be even more higher or even more scary. And then you're looking at the units to retrofit each year. By having this data and these targets, it really helps us hone in on not just, okay, what do we need to do to reach your climate goals? We know what we need to do now. Now it's saying how. How do we get 962 buildings in Watertown electrified by 2025? And that's when we start talking about the various mechanisms we have to do that. And that's why we have to talk now about what those barriers are so that we can start overcoming them as soon as possible. Looking more specifically at some of the reduction scenarios, I know lab space obviously is growing for you all. And so that's something to be paying attention to. Obviously, there's opportunities looking at, you know, microgrids and whatnot, but this is really looking overall at total fossil fuel buildings that are remaining and trying to reduce those. Here we've got solar opportunities. This is just from the Google solar map, but just saying, hey, we've got a lot of flat roofs. You know, what is the opportunity to get more solar while we're waiting for the grid? We can't just sit and wait, right? So as the grid is trying to increase its renewable mix, what can we do locally? Can we get more rooftop solar? Can we get more folks engaged in the Clean Energy Choice program? These are the things we'll want to look at. I see a lot coming from the chat.
Kim, do you want me to repeat the question?
That would be great. And I may have Mike help out and answer some of these.
Yeah, so Eric is asking if we will be looking at job impacts of retrofits.
So meaning will it create jobs? I mean, we're certainly anticipating that it will, and I know there are some studies on that. Mike, do you have a response?
Yeah, I think there's some standard sort of multipliers that we can look at in terms of, yeah, how much work is that going to be and how much, you know, potential economic development that could be if there are Watertown businesses that are ready to jump on and do the work. I think that's also very much related to the next question from Libby in, are there enough companies doing heat pump retrofits to serve the potential demand if lots of communities have goals like ours? I think that goes to, yeah, there's certainly a need for workforce development. I know that there's mention of that in some of the state plans. I don't know exactly if it's there yet, but I think all the more reason to get on those contractors, get on their list early.
And I think what you're going to find, I mean, Boston is doing this. They have tens of thousands of buildings they're trying to do massive energy retrofits on. One of the barriers that they identified in their planning process was exactly this. There were not enough skilled workers to deliver that. And so then, okay, good that we know that now. Let's develop a workforce development program that's really honed in specifically on these kinds of opportunities. And this is a great way to try to work on economic development, workforce development, bring everyone together, recognizing here's where we need to get to. We're going to need more skilled folks to deliver that. So absolutely, we want to be looking at the impacts and opportunities as it relates to jobs and workforce development, and creating more opportunities for folks who might not have them right now. Okay, great questions. I'm just going to cover this 2 more quick slides, and then we'll go to the worksheets. And I know this has come up before. Actually, let me just quickly go back here. Based on what we've seen, it is possible that you could get to about 30% of your demand from solar by 2050. Am I reading that right, Mike?
Yes, of the projected demand after everything gets electrified.
Yeah, so that's such a great point, because as we're electrifying, right, if we're not keeping the increase in the renewables at pace with the additional electricity, we're not helping ourselves. We're just putting ourselves on the treadmill, essentially, as we're adding EVs, as we're electrifying buildings. So in order to balance that out, here are some of those opportunities. And then not lastly, but energy efficiency and conservation. I know this is something that folks have been discussing. we cannot just go to renewables. We cannot just go to heat pumps and think everything's done. We really do need to reduce the amount that we're using. We need to conserve. We need to be efficient. There are still plenty of incentives and opportunities to do that. And Mike has estimated that there's a potential savings of 56,000 megawatt hours with some of these deep energy retrofits. And so that's important. And I know that folks have talked a lot about conservation and behavior change, and that's all a part of this. But I think sometimes it's easier to understand that when you have maybe a smarter building that can accommodate some of it. And then of course your Watertown electricity choice. What's it going to take to really close that gap sooner? How fast can we get to 100%? And really understanding what that looks like, because that will help you continuing to move forward, possibly faster than the region. But that's where we need to get to. So this is some of the data that is in the worksheet for the Buildings and Energy Group. And I'm going to stop my share. We're going to walk through. I'm checking my time. Okay. We don't have any time. Okay. We're going to quickly go through one example here with the whole group. So I encourage folks to go ahead and take off. If you want to say something, you can raise your hand on the Zoom and then you can unmute yourself. I'll have the team kind of check on that. So this very first one, eliminate fossil fuels as an allowed energy source for any new construction and major renovations. It's always easier to get to put something out there now that's addressing new development, right? It's harder, much harder to deal with existing. So what are some thoughts? What do folks have as from thoughts? We have some examples in here, but if we were to look at any of these potential mechanisms, what would be an idea for eliminating fossil fuels from new construction?
Kim, can you just repeat what the mechanisms are?
Yes, thank you. The mechanisms are, again, our regulatory requirements. So think about zoning, building code, mandatory design standards, voluntary standards, which would be voluntary, requirements, incentives, financial tax credits, streamlined permitting, and then education. And then we can look at those separately if we want for commercial, residential, municipal, and institutional. All right, we've got raised hands. Libby.
So actually, it seems like we had a lot of success, a real harbinger of success with the solar panel zoning requirement. And I guess a question to Steve Magoon would be how well is that working, and could we just use a similar model for eliminating fossil fuels?
I would say that's working very well. Whether we could simply eliminate use of fossil fuels as a zoning amendment, I don't know. Certainly something to look at. That's a regulatory approach, sort of the force it to happen. What I was going to suggest is the possibility of doing something more along the incentives end of it by utilizing some funding to, create a financial benefit that would encourage people to retrofit their homes. And one of the reasons I say that is because, the regulatory one, as Kim said, might make sense for new building, but doesn't address existing buildings at all. I think you have to find a way to encourage people that aren't necessarily coming to the town to make a major investment in their home to have a reason to do such.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll do Eric, and then we're going to jump into the next phase of this quickly so we can have time for all the groups.
So one of the big issues with residential retrofits is cash flow for a lot of people. The long-term benefits are positive, but you don't see the return immediately. And so I'm wondering if there's some kind of loan that could be offered, supported, a program offered by perhaps even by banks, that would allow homeowners to capture the benefits early and slowly pay down the cost of the retrofit, but see be able to capture the benefits early. Sorry, it's a bit vague.
No, but this is great because guess what? That you just brought us right into our barrier, right? And so if this were the strategy for existing buildings, then we know that cash flow is going to be a challenge for folks. And then you also just jumped right into the opportunity, right? So this is the idea for the working groups, the breakout group sessions coming up here is like identifying that, okay, we have a cash flow issue. How can we overcome that? And it sounds like the loan program you're talking about and some of the suggestions that Steve just had for existing buildings could be that good opportunity there. This would be an action, Talia, specifically to like a financial benefit, encouraging people to retrofit their homes. There's also a ton of incentives in Massachusetts that a lot of people do not take full advantage of. They don't know about it. And so there's a lot of education that can happen with these. So it would be great to see a community like Watertown really maximizing that, that opportunity. And so as you're going through this and you think about, all right, loan program through banks, that might raise some questions like, all right, well, exactly what does that look like? What kind of banks would do this for us? Is this something that the city has to support? Is it something that a nonprofit would run, right? These are some of the questions that are come up. I really want you all in your breakout groups to be thinking very specifically, how do we make this happen? What does this look like in Watertown? And, you know, thinking about those barriers and opportunities, but then getting those questions out and the data needs out. We don't have to get all those answers tonight, but we need to know what those questions are so we can spend the next month and a half really diving in getting those answers so that then we can figure out, can we actually overcome this barrier now that we know this information? And then lastly, what does that equity consideration look like? If we want folks to retrofit their homes, would there possibly be a special program for folks that are at a lower income? Could we subsidize that in some way? Could we work through some of the federal or state programs for housing authorities and making sure that those facilities are getting updated faster, right? So this is the way we're going to kind of build out our specific actions so that, again, we can really understand what the steps need to be when we have this table of kind of these 4 boxes filled out. So that is it. And I apologize to my facilitator team that I went 6 minutes over. Sometimes I just get so excited. You will have an opportunity to ask more specific questions about this process in your breakout groups. But this is exactly what everyone's going to be flowing through, that kind of working through these worksheets based on the information that you have provided, as well as the data that we've provided today. So we are now going to be whisked away. There will be a group in this main room. So for those live streaming, the Buildings and Energy group will stay here in the main room and I believe be viewable. Everyone else will be off in a breakout. And we'll see you all in an hour.
Great. And Kim, I'm going to break everyone out in a moment, but if something happens and you do get kicked out of your breakout room, come back to the meeting, send me a chat. My name is Danielle, and I will put you back into the room that you need to be in. All right, here we go.
Okay. Great to see you all, Buildings Group. So let's see. I know Brian and I know Ed. I know I've seen Pat online before. Hello, Pat. Good to see you again. And I believe Michael is the one who, at least I haven't seen on a meeting yet, but yeah, great to have you as part of this discussion for Buildings and Energy. So what we want to do, also, I want to make sure that I'm going to record this local just in case. Excellent. So before we really dive in here, just do some quick sort of ground rules, right? We want to make sure that we have a good engaging discussion. So, you know, if you have any issues with, feel like you can't be heard, please put in the chat or otherwise make note. We'll make sure that we're making time for everybody to participate. Let's assume that everybody here has the best intentions. We're going to talk about some stuff, and there are definitely points of view that folks want to have represented, and we want to document those more than anything. But our idea here, we are working through this together, and I think everybody's at the table because we want to see Watertown achieve these goals. And the question is just to try to figure out, okay, what are the things we can move on now? Maybe what are the things that we can move on later on? So with those sort of ground rules, make sure that we're keeping it open for everyone to participate. Thought we would just sort of start off here with going through the actions themselves and the worksheet. I think maybe I can do a little bit of this sort of background information, and then I will turn it over to Mehdi, who's going to actually take the notes while we go through these. So I'm going to grab the screen share here quickly. Okay, so you all should have these notes. You should have the worksheet. So definitely try to keep them up on another screen if you've got that ability, or somewhere else to print them. But the big sources: electricity, natural gas, fuel oil across the community. So that's great. We know that already. Maybe some of the other things to keep in mind as we think about how we're going to target these things. First, where are the big existing sources, right? Obviously, this chart is all about existing sources, even though we talk about a lot about the new sources. Education buildings, offices, warehouse, that's the biggest area, at least in terms of maybe where some of those big wins are on the commercial side. I think it is useful to look at these. Can talk about this a bit, but I think the big takeaway from comparing both the area and the emissions from the residential and commercial side, yes, maybe there's some big wins that we could rack up with a relatively smaller space, but the residential side, there's a lot more work to be done here. This is, I think the point is, if we need to get on it and start getting on these pathways, there's a lot more to figure out within the residential space to start addressing these numbers. I think as we refine things over time, it'll be useful to think about maybe some of the particular challenges challenges and opportunities. So what percent of the households maybe already have a forced air distribution system? Like, that's going to be way easier to put in a heat pump than it is one that's got a steam distribution system. So maybe there's some things there that we can think about, like, oh, these guys are ready to go. It's going to be cheaper. We can knock these out early. There are some forced water systems that technologies that are in development. I think those will come out soon. So again, we can try to stage these things in a productive way. The other thing, like, what about ownership? Maybe it's easy to pick out the one families at a time, but what about the condo associations? Or do we have to deal with condo associations to get some things done in really a lot of units in Watertown? But maybe there's some opportunity there for knocking out 3 at a time. I don't want to harp too much or go through a lot of these details, because we do want to focus on a lot of the actions themselves, but there are definitely a few things in here. So if you've got opportunity to just sort of glance through on your own, thinking about what is the breakdown of all the number of different houses, how many different oil versus natural gas versus electric resistance heating, those have got to change out as well. Those sorts of things to keep in mind. On the solar side, we looked at what sort of that potential was in terms of number of systems and capacity. We're at just a tiny fraction of what's possible. So I think there's lots of room for more solar to happen if we were to put it on every available building that can really facilitate it. But whenever we can't do that, obviously Watertown Energy Choice the current, or at least the starting enrollment numbers, 3% at the 100% renewal option. So maybe we can get those to ramp up as well. Just a quick rundown of the pathways. Again, we've already covered that. So maybe we can actually, just quickly reiterate what the high impact strategies were. We're going to eliminate fossil fuels as an allowed energy resource for any new construction and major renovations, electrify existing buildings running on fossil fuels, and enhance and actively promote deep energy retrofits and aggressive energy conservation programs. So let's start with those. We can get back to the energy resources one, but maybe I'll actually now turn it over to Mehdi, and you can share the screen, and we can go through these, walk through these together. Here's my controls. Yeah. Okay, so Kim, we went through this first one a little bit, and we got some good feedback on this one, but just want to make sure that there's nothing else that folks specifically in the buildings group have been thinking about in terms of specific actions that we could utilize here for, again, eliminating the fossil fuels as an allowed energy source for new construction and major renovations.
Yeah, Mike, I just had a very quick comment. I love the idea when we're starting to go down about other loan programs to help folks with this. There is a solar incentive loan program run by the state that I actually think has been helpful, and we possibly could model it after that.
Excellent.
Mike, could we bother you to zoom in as Scotch too? It's a little difficult to read.
With many.
Oh, Mehdi, sorry. Thank you, Mehdi.
Sorry, Ed, when you're talking about an incentive program, are you talking about like the heat smart programs, or are you talking about like energy retrofits, or what specifically?
All of the above, but specifically I was thinking of the one they have, the Solarize loan program that I thought was helpful. And I might be saying that wrong. I'm not sure if it was Solarize.
Yeah.
Solar, yeah, that's just a tick. I can look at that up, but there's been a bunch of work done on that. And if we could do something similar, I'd rather start from something that works.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I guess what I was saying is like they have Heat Smart, which is basically the equivalent of a solarized program for heat pumps.
Right, for heat pumps.
Yeah.
But
So I'm trying to understand is like you're saying to do.
Well, I love the Heat Smart program, but we've not, that may be just the way to do it. Similar to the Solarize, I have seen programs run in towns with both Solarize and Heat Smart going.
Yeah,
on that.
It can definitely be good if you combine them together. I think, actually both of these, as I think about those programs, maybe those are going to be better to think about on the retrofits and the deep energy efficiency, since those are what those are geared towards. In terms of limiting new fossil, one thing that I thought might be a useful thing to maybe explore, instead of incentives, maybe disincentives. Maybe there's fees for hookups or something like that could potentially, at least slow down the pace or make the delta between looking at, do we install, do we go with the gas, or do we just go ahead and electrify? Those kinds of things could be the make or break if an actual requirement ends up to be difficult to do.
I think it's a great idea. I think you'd probably want to make a note about that from an equity standpoint.
Yeah.
I just comment on the fees for the gas hookups. You want to be, again, always cognizant of the fact that we cannot upgrade them ourselves at the Housing Authority for over 240 family units in Watertown. And that is a cost to a low-income family resident that's already greatly struggling throughout this pandemic. So we are constantly doing either our in-house plumbing or chasing toll and coming by to do gas dryers, and the ranges. And so just always think about the cost and the fee that would be associated with those families.
Right, right. Yeah, very good points. Again, thinking about this from a new construction point of view in terms of limiting the number of new buildings that are going to be fueled with gas. So hopefully that doesn't impact the housing authority so much directly, but it's definitely something that we should be considering. So these are all great things that I think we're actually going to want to bring down into the opportunities and the barriers. I mean, it's great that we can just talk about them freely. But maybe before we move on there, is there anything else, any other ideas that we've got, maybe things that I've been thinking about, whether it's the mechanism or, specifically either targeting residential, commercial, municipal. I don't know if there's anything that you've been thinking about in terms of, could the town at least declare, hey, we're not going to do any gas or oil. I know that oil's already on its way out.
One thing I was wondering about, people have really focused on gas hookups, but I'm wondering about oil heat hookups. Because again, you saw there's a large number of oil heat, and I don't know how popular it is for new connections, but I wonder about not losing that issue about avoiding new oil hookups.
Yep, that's a great point. I think that's
and I think part of that, to me, I've noticed, and again, other people like Ed or Mike, you may know more about this than I do, but I've noticed that it seems like some of the oil companies are recognizing that this is the way the wind is blowing, and they're starting to install heat pumps. But I think that this might be a really good place to work on retraining for some of these companies to sense an opportunity, realizing that's the way that the world's going, because I think they make most of their money off of maintenance and stuff. And if they could realize that they could be installing heat pumps, which is a growth market, that if we could maybe reach out to some of these local companies that are doing oil and say, look, there's this great new market that's going to be underserved underserved for quite a while, and you could get trained on this and start pushing your customers in that direction for this and also for other ones.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brian. I've definitely seen some that are catching on, but we can be looking for more of those opportunities. Pat, it looked like you were raising your hand there. Do you have something to add? You may have been swatting at something. It looked like you had your hand raised. Yes, go ahead.
Pat, are you talking?
This is just a kind of process question. Are we using the long list of actions from the working group, or have we discarded that?
We've not discarded that. I mean, those are certainly, we can pull in from those, sorry, I didn't transfer all of those to the worksheet. Just wanting to make sure that
okay,
idea for the top ones to come across. Was there one in particular that you wanted to see?
No, it's just that I've been working on those, so I'm got a little confused about where they'd gone.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I do have that document up, and we can refer to that to see if there's specific ones that are not covered here. I think this one may be one of the.
It's covered. I mean, I think the language may be slightly different on this, but speaking for myself, I think Pat makes a good point, and I think what I would like to see, I didn't know, is there a full list of all the categories that we're going to be covering tonight, or are we just going to kind of pull them up one at a time? Because I mean, my sense is that we're going to have a lot of overlap between what we did in the working group and what you're going to cover here tonight.
Sure.
Mike. So my tendency would be to let you roll with what you have, and if we see that there are missing pieces, we can cover that. And also, just as a process point to follow up on Pat, I mean, my sense is we're not going to get through everything tonight. Maybe you're going to be so efficient we will, but I would think that this would be something that we would probably have follow up afterwards that will need to be done anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. And anything that either came from other working group discussions that you all want to basically run through the same process, there will certainly be more of those. But yeah, we want to try to get the top actions, the ones that you all have been thinking about that are your favorites, the ones that are going to do the work, and again, run them mostly through this opportunities and barriers discussion so that we've got something that's sort of tangible, like, okay, now where do we go with this from here?
Okay, and while we're talking about the gas specifically, there has been talk about like these home rule things, and I'm not sure if that's covered by the zoning amendment thing or that's sort of a separate piece of that, or if that's worth mentioning.
It is worth mentioning, certainly. Maybe let's add that in the barriers. I think, with some of the things like what Brookline has been exploring on that, I think it's maybe just trying to find the right mechanism.
Yeah.
And so if it's not,
yeah, maybe just be considered a detail of the zoning amendment issue.
Right. So maybe there's actual limitations there for what we can do with zoning and code updates. But maybe something like fees could be a way to advance the idea, even if it's not like a blanket ban, for example. Okay. So maybe let's take the, was there a particular one that we really want to dig at here, fees or maybe a zoning amendment to go through and just make sure we're getting everything in the opportunities and barriers?
Well, I think on Brian's action list, we were trying to mimic the solar ordinance in terms of the sizes of buildings for new construction and the sizes for existing buildings. And so I think we were at a level of detail that you don't have here. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So maybe let's take that. So that this sort of working off of the solar amendment to basically have it apply to limiting fossil fuel from
Yeah. Starting with us, the 10,000 square feet or 10 units in terms of new construction. I think that's what we were doing, isn't it, Brian? I mean, I have that sheet.
We're using the solar ordinance as a sort of a threshold for some things, and I think in particular we were looking at that as a Budo, and I think some other things. I don't know if we were doing that about about the net zero. Let me look. I'm looking.
Well, it says require commercial buildings, 10,000 square feet, residential buildings.
Yes, yes, you're right. Yep, you're right. It's also, I mean, I guess I'm still a little bit unclear. This is both for like trying to avoid like gas and oil hookups, but it's also for trying to do a net zero zoning requirement, which is sort of different in my mind because it also that goes into like energy efficiency standards and stuff. That's sort of a different kind of a thing. So I was a little bit unclear about what this overall strategy is, and I don't know if other people are confused by that too.
Well, so I think the net zero would be, yes, it would do this and help support the energy efficiency goals, but in terms of just getting at this specific strategy of eliminating new fossil fuels. So we've got that, and yes, it can work in other ways. Maybe let's just focus on net zero building code, and we can run that through the opportunities and barriers discussion. And I think that maybe we'll go through some of the other strategies that focus on energy efficiency, those sorts of things, and maybe some of these other differences will start to bubble up there. So with regard to net zero building ordinance, barriers. So there's at least a thought that we're not legally able to do that. I know that seems to be a point of contention, and maybe actually needs clarification from town legal in order to answer that. Is that a fair assessment?
And you mean a net zero zoning requirement above and beyond whatever the state would enable?
Correct, above the
state law.
Right.
Yeah, well, and something we mentioned before, but one of the barriers will certainly be the workforce to, provide the building for net zero. And just for the record, Mike, I'm sort of a fan of breaking these up. I think that the, eliminate fossil fuel hookups for buildings is a different goal than the net zero, and the time frame I think may be different. But let's keep going on this.
Yeah, just sorry that was kind of where I was at too. I find these a little confusing to be combined.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it was just as that net zero would get at a mechanism for stopping those additions. Although I guess the wording depends on whether or not they actually would. So I guess in that sense, do we want to table the net zero and come back to that on the next strategy, or?
I think it might be good to just, deal with them one at a time if other people agree. I'm seeing Ed nod.
Agreed.
And I think Pat would probably agree, because that was the way we had them split up with the action items too, that we had done with the working group. I don't know how Michael feels.
Okay. So then, are there other actions? And I'm looking also at the action list here that we're specifically targeting limiting new fossil. I did not see any others in the Google Doc that were aimed at that specifically. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of tools for that. I think personally, those are the only ones I can think of.
Okay. Well, in that case, maybe we should move on to the next strategy. So, electric building. Thunderstorm rolling through. Maybe can you scroll down a little bit more and we can look at some of these metrics, and that one got a little wonky there, but okay. So with the focus of how we get electrified for all of the existing buildings that are out there. So we've got the two tables here that sort of break this up. I mean, I think it's just useful to think about here for the scale that's going to be required.
You're breaking up a little bit, Mike. I don't know if other people are having trouble, but I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
It's garbled.
Very strong thunderstorm through here. Okay. So we've got, in terms of what needs to happen, so the percentages here are basically even slightly aggressive, more aggressive than the decarbonization roadmap based on Watertown buildings. You know, we're looking at 962 residential units by 2025 to at least get on this pathway. So, you know, we don't have to get too hung up on the numbers, but just to give you a sense of, you know, what is really going to be required to hit this. So we've got that on the residential side, you know, looking at like 52 per year on the commercial side. So, you know, those could be a little more targeted, but yeah, again, just to give us a sense for what we need to see. And then, Brian, I remember some of the earlier conversations that we had about, like, well, could Watertown get to 100% earlier than that? And that's really what that last line shows of, like, okay, if we wanted to be there by 2040, it's 29 per year over the life, you know, from now until 2050. So it does kind of average everything out, but, you know, that's what it would take to get to fully off of fossil in each type of building by 2040 or 2030. Okay, so let's scroll down to actually look at some of our actions. And this
Sorry,
is,
can I ask a quick question? With
Yep.
the numbers that you have up there for the residential retrofits, the 241 per year, do we have any sense of like how many of those will be done as business as usual by mass save, or would this be considered an additional mass save, or would these be considered different kinds of retrofits from mass save?
yep. You know, I think mass save is definitely the primary mechanism, and we would hope that the state is programs in a way that has everybody sort of getting on this pathway. You know, I think there's, unfortunately, the way that they break out the current program data, it doesn't break it down by community. So it's a little hard to say, like, okay, how many people are actually doing this today? There is the one other data point or thing that I've thought of in terms of thinking, like, is that a lot or not? Is 3% per year is the average rate of renovation. And I'm trying to think, quick here, what is that?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. 3% per year is what?
The rate of home renovations.
Not mass save, but the rate of renovations in general.
Renovations in general. How many people are, you know, getting in place, which is a great opportunity to get in there. That's 288 per year, of 3% of the 9,624. So, you know, it's actually, at least to start off with, you know, giving a sense of like how much that is and how feasible that is. That seems potentially doable, but, you know, more like in the 2030s and 2040s, we would need to be getting people to sort of actively, you know, go out of their way when they're not doing something like that to make these changes.
Well, I quite frankly feel that, I know it's kind of kicking the can down the road, but I think that by 2030 or 2040, you know, 5 years, 15 years from now, that there will be policies in place, hopefully on the state and federal level, that will push things. There'll be new technology, whatever. I'm frankly more worried about the short-term goals. So if you think that these 241 per year is something that may happen sort of kind of automatically by Mass Save, then that gives me kind of a comfort level that that's relatively doable. And if it's, you know, not knowing what Watertown in particular does, I would think that Watertown is probably typical, like any city is roughly, you know, order of magnitude similar, you know, city to city. I imagine it is different demographically and like how new the city is and such, but I would think that you could at least get a ballpark, you know, of what Mass Save is statewide and say that Watertown's going to be close to that. And so if you know what Mass Save percentage is statewide, that should give you a pretty good idea what Watertown's would be, right?
Yeah, you're right. There should be some ways that we could try to downscale and figure out, okay, what really is the pace that the program is going to support. But you know, I think to Kim's point earlier, we know that lots of people are not taking advantage. So let's try to figure out. Maybe if you can scroll down, and we'll start going through the exercise here to think about, all right, how do we actually get more of these done? So in this case, we've got we're thinking about, again, that green net zero zoning requirement that would be triggered at time of sale. So that's one way to get at the existing structures. Maybe there's some opportunities to do that. Maybe it's, you know, finding some ways to improve the financing, like what was coming up in the earlier session about whether it's finding the right lenders to help that, and connecting Watertown residents to lenders who maybe have particular programs in that area.
I just would add one thing, if it's all right. I don't know if it pertains to this area, but the state, the Department of Housing and Community Development, is trying to offer massive incentives to housing authorities because of the huge utility costs in these existing older buildings who have not had utilities, gas piping, or anything updated since their original construction, 40s, 60s, like that. So there's a possibility that we could have much more savings if we're allowed to partner with a Waltham Housing Authority and have somebody come by and look at these and see where we could have the savings often. So just something to think about. The existing buildings that we have at the housing authorities are in desperate need of these updates, but we have, and the state has, no money for such large capital upgrades. So
yeah, that's great. So that should go under the institutional. Right.
And you do have access to Mass Save money though, right, Michael?
yes, but it's a little bit different. They can't just come household to household. It could be a massive bid as well if you're upgrading a lot of windows. You know, you could trigger a public bid process there, but you know, when it's energy savings, the state's very quick to say, you know, whatever you need. And you know, they're often asking us, well, why is your per unit monthly so high on your water costs, electrical, all these things? And we've done everything we can to do energy savings, but honestly, I need to go around and educate residents, and in particular, elderly and low-income families that are, you know, connecting that washer right to the front of the, you know, sink and abusing that, but I don't have anybody to go and check that and to see what's going on. So, you know, partnering with the local housing authority could make the funding easier, but there's a huge need.
Sorry, I was having some technical difficulties with my Word document. Could you repeat the action that might come out of that, your discussion?
Myself? Sorry?
Anyone who could synthesize it. I just want to make sure I get it down.
Yeah, Michael, where was the funding coming from?
You know, we could take advantage of sustainability funds from DHCD. You know, they are, again, incentivizing to lower utility costs for these structures. You know, you got 43,000 public housing units across just state public housing units. And again, there's a big push to get some federal ARPA and infrastructure money now to update this, but you know, we'll see. A lot of people in line for that money.
Okay.
You said DHCD, not DACD, right?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see that. DHCD, Department of Housing Community Development. Good catch.
Okay, any other particular ones, maybe from the list that the working group was already working from?
Mike,
Yes.
this may sound like it's coming from left field, but this is what confuses me. Given the number of units, even taking the residential units that use natural gas, and the number of hot water systems, heating systems, I don't see how we get to where we need to go without that repurposing of gas lines, as in the gas companies' pilot programs, which we heard a lot about for a while, and suddenly we're not hearing much about anymore. But I don't see how we can do without that.
So that would be the geomicrogrid.
That kind of idea, yeah. Geothermal, using the gas lines, using the gas workers, and essentially giving them a new kind of job.
Yeah, no, that's a great addition, Pat. You know, I think that's cross-cutting, right? That could get at the big commercial buildings, right? It's something that you could actually support those larger loads that they need, as well as potentially, knocking out a whole neighborhood at a time. So thank you for bringing that up. That is a really important one.
When you talk about heat pump rebate program under incentives, what were you talking about from the town, like a heat pump rebate program, or again, just us facilitating somebody else's?
Facilitating someone else's, unless, I don't know that the town would be putting money into that specifically. I think there are maybe
So
some.
again, this might be like a Heat Smart program, like what other towns have done.
Correct.
Okay.
You don't have to add this, but DECD offers air source heat pump rebate. They put them in for free, actually. The only problem is housing authorities have asked, well, are we going to get maintenance costs to, work on these over time? Because this is New England. And so maybe that's not as viable because of these, we talked about earlier, the big industry for it, but with the extra money, sometimes you're costing a housing authority more by putting in the heat pump. And so you're not seeing housing authorities bite, but it's another program that's offered. So it's an incentive.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good one for barriers. Let's run the geomicrogrids idea through the opportunities and barriers. So, I think this one has big potential. Obviously, there's some barriers. I think the big ones that come to mind for me are, figuring out where are the feasible locations, and maybe knowing more about what the actual plans of the gas utilities are in terms of pushing this forward.
Yeah, one barrier is, how enthusiastic are the gas companies really, having developed these programs? Are they going to carry through?
Well, and working with DPU as well, right? Because there's the utilities themselves, but there's also DPU and their bureaucracy in terms of getting change made. Like, how long would it take for them to go from pilot to actual full scale or even medium scale implementation of this?
Yeah, so we're probably, this is probably a medium term at best.
Yeah, I mean, the way DPU works for something as big as this, it could be 5 years out before they really get something like this implemented, even if they feel some urgency. I'm just making that number up, but I
wouldn't disagree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's dealt with the DPU.
Right. So maybe always try to flip that barrier and figure out what the opportunity is. So if it's going to be a little while, then how do we figure out where's the best locations maybe that are going to support this?
Well, and I also think trying for pilots, which we've talked about trying in the past, right, is can we get a pilot for one of these good locations that you're talking about identifying? So identify a good location and advocate for a pilot in Watertown or two.
And use municipal building. If there is a new municipal project, push to have that be a pilot program. For instance, the new high school, which we've already encouraged them to look
Possibly,
at.
although I think maybe not limited to that. I would say limited to whatever the best one is, because maybe one of these new life science campuses where, you know, they're saying it's hard for them to get to net zero or close to it. Maybe they're a good candidate because they are so energy intensive. So I think
Yes, I agree with that.
right.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense if you can prove it out in like the problem cases, then
The energy hogs.
Huge. And the new schools do not have gas lines whatsoever.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
Nothing there.
forgot that.
good work, Ed.
Hey, Mike, another one I wanted to make sure we captured, I believe, barriers is, well, actually competing against the current mass save incentives, which are really strong for changing oil to gas, but they need to be changing oil to, heat pumps or gas to heat pumps.
Yeah, I know. I don't know where this landed, but I did hear that they wanted to change the way that those incentives are structured. So maybe there's an advocacy point that could be made to make sure that that actually happens, because I know that that was a contentious one.
Well, and I think this also comes back, somebody mentioned financing, and I think financing is a big issue with so many of these issues, whether it's solar or whether it's energy retrofits, that financing is a huge issue. And so that's a barrier, but in terms of the opportunity, the flip side of that, looking at what Cambridge was looking at was having a, well, I'll use the word slush fund, but you don't want to write that down, having a fund available that they were looking to fund from their compliance fund, alternative compliance fund that they had set up. So, I mean, that would be one way of doing it, but some fund that the town could have set up from whatever source, right, that could actually be used to, and especially from an equity standpoint for low income households to be able to use that. And that would be one thing. I mean, another thing, like, you know, in terms of financial opportunities would be PACE, especially CPACE, would be a big opportunity that, again, from commercial, large commercial corporations have deep pockets. They can do these retrofits, but smaller ones often don't have the ability to get the commercial loans to do these retrofits.
Yeah.
And so CPACE is hugely helpful for them.
What about equity considerations around this stuff? I know that, well, I've heard at least that sometimes PACE programs can create some challenges there if it maybe complicates people's loans on their houses. I don't have a lot of details on that, but maybe there are things to think about that.
Yeah, I don't know a lot of detail about that. I could see where that could be an issue. I mean, in theory, you would, the idea behind doing energy retrofits or solar is that it increases the value because your monthly utility bills go down. So if you sell a house, you're selling to somebody who has a combined monthly bill is less for their mortgage and utility combined. So it's an economic win to do that, but I don't know the details. There may be circumstances where that doesn't really work out for people, where somebody does a PACE loan and then they try and sell their house, and for some reason that doesn't work out economically. I don't know. It'd be worth checking into.
Yeah,
I just want to add something quick. I think it's a great comment. Ensure low-income households are able to access funds for electrifying their homes. I know right now we get fuel assistance for a lot of the times when we have the gas bill, but you're not talking enough about a particular low income. As we increase and see electrical costs go up, they have to pay it in public housing. Unlike the elderly family pay their own electricity bill, and that should not be unique to Watertown Housing Authority. If there is a fund available, I don't know how you would afford it, but if there's incentive to say to 30%, 50% AMI, and say if you keep your electricity bill under a certain usage or cost, then that would then provide the town to cover 50% of it, or something like that. That could provide huge savings. But I've never heard of a program like that. I think it's certainly outside the box, but we are not talking enough about what financial benefit there is for helping those who are low income for these bigger electrical bills.
that's a great point.
So, so there is, I mean, you do get a lower rate, right, if you're low income. I'm not sure if that's equivalent to, I'm not that familiar with what the low rate is that people get, or subsidized rate that people get for gas.
It's easier when you have a big a winter that built up and you have $350, $450, and $500 that you owe National Grid. It is much easier for us to get that source of funding for the family than it is when that electrical bill builds up for Eversource. I find it that there's just less streams of funding for that right now. And those are the bills that are creeping up quickly.
And that's really the way like the LIHEAP programs are structured, that they're geared towards specifically heating fuels.
I'm not certain on the last point. Ed, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Well, maybe that's a question.
Sure. I don't have an answer for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like something to look into, but I'm wondering if that's a question of education for the people who are doing the funding for that. As they go to electrification, that they need to realize that that's where people's heating is going to be coming from, because it hasn't really traditionally been.
Well, that's a good point, because the LIHEAP programs are focused, again, more on fossil fuels right now due to the heating aspect. Yeah.
Okay, this is good. We're getting some important considerations here, but I do want to keep moving just so that we get some coverage of everything. So let's maybe move over more on the energy supply side. I think is maybe the next one that we will get to for we have deep energy retrofits. I do want to get to it maybe on the solar supply side. So maybe let's go to the strategy B4. I think we have covered a few things that are certainly deep energy retrofit related already. So strategy B4, accelerating the installation of rooftop solar throughout town. So we've got a few examples here to start with. One that I actually added to the list under the voluntary standards and policies, something that I just learned about over the weekend, is this new expedited solar app permitting program that DOE just launched. That's sort of a turnkey, get your community basically everything that you need from a permitting perspective. I guess they've got just sort of like all the infrastructure that's needed to make it super simple for installers and everybody in the mix to just get more solar up. So it seemed like it was a pretty big announcement from DOE. It's something that I need to look into more because I just learned about it, but it seems Seems pretty useful. Other big ones, favorites that folks have about getting more solar deployed. I think there was one in the working group list that is to expand the solar requirement.
Yes.
Right, and we've already got that one in there.
And actually, it's not just for commercial, it's also for large residential as well.
And we've been thinking more specifically about so it's lowering the threshold for that ordinance. Where do we think we would be the sort of next target level?
I just want to add, I know, Brian, we discussed it, we don't want to get lost in it, but just to add, it's not probably for this meeting, but that there would have to be specific language in this, because there's so many things to consider, both the shade of the area, does it make sense? Are there other things that are happening there? You know, do we want to have percent requirements? I know that was a somewhat controversial topic, but I would say to have the increase to expand the ordinance was clearly what sounded to be sort of what everybody agreed upon.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Michael. There was some discussion about how we would increase it. And I don't know, like, again, whether we want to even come up with a number at this part of the process, or whether we just want to agree that this is something that's going to need to be increased over time in order to meet our goals. And I also think that we do want to make sure that there are, qualifications in there for things like, yes, don't put solar on a shaded roof. I mean, there are already qualifications in the current solar ordinance, and maybe those are sufficient, but yeah, we want to make sure that we don't require things that don't make sense.
Pat, you have your hand up. Yes, go ahead, Pat.
Oh, this may sound crazy, but I think there should be a solar energy credit bank. For instance, I've had solar on my house for 5 years. I have a $2,000 credit with Eversource. I think there should be a way to transfer those credits, say, to the housing authority for some kind of shared use.
That's a very interesting idea.
So there's virtual net metering right now, right? So you
We
could.
have metering. I would just add, it's very kind of you. Thank you for adding the housing authority. I know towns and housing authorities are often partnering. We've partnered with 2 places, Pout Rock LLC, and now we just finished entering into a contract with Lodestar Energy, and they're going to start construction of some major solar panels up in Sandwich, down in Sandwich, and again, it offsets what we're putting in the grid. But these net metering contracts are quite complex, and the incentive of working with the town and the housing authority are to make sure that based on where we see utility costs, is there a good sort of savings that we can see and a benefit for both sides. But I know the town and housing authorities are always appealing because we're in law, that we're going to be around. We're one of the few things is going to be around in 20 years, and these are very long contracts. But it's very outside the box thinking. We currently do a lot with net metering credits, so that's great thinking.
Okay. So I know we're gonna get whisked away here in 3 minutes, or I guess everyone else is gonna join us again. Anything else that folks want to get out?
I would just add also that for both commercial and residential, there's other financial, sorry, not incentives, but also credit issues, similar to the energy efficiency, things like PACE, and also, potentially having the town have a fund available to work for loans for people. So I think similar, I would kind of maybe cut and paste some of the language from the other one. You don't have to do it now necessarily, but you might want to use some of the same language for financially enabling type programs.
And is there anything else on the municipal side? I'm just thinking out loud.
Well, we had, you mean for municipal buildings per se, or in terms of regulatory types things?
Per se, yeah. Municipal buildings per se.
So we had talked about in the working group trying to reevaluate all the Watertown municipal buildings for solar, the existing buildings, and also the municipal parking lots.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to keep in the bank. Well,
I know we're about to run out of time, but we're not municipal. We're the special employees over here in the housing authority, but we have a lot of properties that could also benefit. You know, there's a lot of parking lots, a lot of potential there, but we lack the funding to do it. So perhaps there's room to investigate, because we still are involved with the town's utilities and draw from it. And so anything we can do to lower it, but I don't have any ability to investigate on our own anytime soon, unfortunately. So just something to consider.
That sounds like a great opportunity. I would definitely capture that.
Yeah, a lot of rooftops there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it makes me wonder about, I don't know, maybe a different twist on Pat's idea of are those community solar opportunities? If people
or PPAs, or there's a bunch of things, but just knowing that they could use help getting solar is just something that gives us an opportunity to assist somehow.
Even to evaluate the properties, we have 5 major developments, over 589 public housing units in the town of Watertown, just to investigate and look at all these roofs and go by and to say, okay, this one makes sense. There's not even any shade at Willow Park, even though it's called Willow Park. You could probably get something on those roofs, things like that.
Yeah, that seems like low-hanging fruit to me. I definitely think that's something we should really look at seriously.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, everyone, while everybody comes back. Excellent participation.
Time sure flies when we're having fun. I know we're really just coming up here at the end. Actually, Talia, I can just throw up the. That's not a good way to say it. I can.
Please don't.
Put up the slides here just to give folks a quick reminder. I hope your sessions were productive. We had a great group in public health, but just really clear on kind of where we're headed. And Talia already talked about this. There is going to be some internal collaboration with you all and between us and the town over the next 2 months, really leading up to us getting to developing out those blueprints. And what are these blueprints that we speak of here? This is just a little bit of an example of what you'll see, and probably, you know, there's also, we'll talk with you about specifically what we want to have. But the idea is, think of this as your work plan. There's going to be a champion identified for each action, and there's going to be an actual specific steps that need to be taken in order to move things forward. I'm actually going to, well, I guess we'll just keep with this. So we'll see the steps, we'll have timeframes, we may have cost estimates, key partners, if there's existing resources to move these steps forward, we want to do that. And then looking at potentially some other areas, are there, do we want to connect to some of your MVP or other goals? How are we measuring our success with these actions? Again, always thinking about those equity considerations. And then separately thinking about engaging the community more as a communications tactic. How are we reaching out and effectively communicating and engaging to our population to the point where they can kind of support implementation? So that's what we're going to work through. It's going to be another roll up our sleeves working session in October. You know, I would love to say that we get to meet in person, but obviously we really don't know, and we'll see only if it's safe. But if we're still on Zoom, we've got some new tools where we'll work on integrating. Again, visit resilient.watertown-ma.gov. We would love for you all to be more engaged, continue to promote and promote the process, promote the surveys, get out to the different activities and events, share photos and stories, hashtag Resilient Watertown, making sure that we really are getting as many folks as possible engaged in this overall planning process. There will be follow-up on email with all of you, and we'll be meeting with the town staff and the working group leads. You know, we meet every other week to just kind of go through keeping things moving forward, but I hope you had amazing sessions. Steve or Laurel, did either of you have any other wrapping words?
I would just say that, you know, very excited to have everyone here. Appreciate very much your time and your effort. I think there's a lot of really tough work ahead of us, and you know, really appreciate everyone's involvement, and look forward to continued dialogue and actually making a difference.
Amazing. I see there's some folks raising hands, but we are literally at end of time here. So I am going to suggest maybe throw something in the chat, but really just giving a big thank you to everyone for your time and commitment to this process. Really excited to keep helping Watertown move to that resilient future. So thank you all again, and have a wonderful rest of the evening.